Well, let's get started here. So today I figured, guys, since, World Championship match is currently ongoing and there's often a lot of importance placed on the opening preparation of both players, especially for every game. You know, if someone is better prepared out of the opening, it kind of feels like a big deal, and a lot of times games are won because someone, finds like one new idea and poses some problems. So I figured with the World Championship going on, it'd be good to do a lesson on opening prep, actually. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the dangers, actually, of opening preparation and some of the places where things can actually go wrong, and hopefully give you guys some tips, because I know a lot of you are probably already preparing openings and working with ChessBase and that kind of thing. Well, actually, let me ask the chat. How many of you guys are actively preparing openings when you're playing a tournament or using ChessBase or preparing lines, anything like this? Okay, a lot of you already. Yeah, so, well, as the class goes on, if you guys have any specific questions on opening preparation, send them to me, and maybe I can get to them at some point. But for this first part, I just want to talk about some of the dangers when it comes to opening prep, because a lot of times, even though you're well prepared in the opening, things can go wrong. And actually, let me put a key position on the board here, see if anyone recognizes this one, because this is kind of a very famous example of some opening prep gone wrong. If you guys recognize this one, let me know privately. Yeah, let me know if you remember the story. But let me ask you guys, what do you think are some of the dangers in opening preparation? What are some of the ways that one can go wrong when they're trying to prepare an opening deeply? And let me clarify something here right off the bat. There's a little bit of a difference between knowing an opening and understanding an opening, as we'll get into. And so when I say opening preparation or knowing an opening, it means it's you've analyzed it with the engine, and the engine evaluation and what the computer thinks, and some key details, compared to, let's say, understanding an opening or understanding a middle game. That's more about let's say knowing the position, knowing what your plan is, knowing what your opponent wants to do, knowing which pieces you want to trade, which pawn breaks you want to execute, and this kind of thing. So that's kind of a difference between, let's say, knowing an opening and understanding an opening, and it's actually not clear which one is better. Okay, so some dangers of opening prep: messing up the move order. Yeah, that happens quite a bit. You prepare a line and it has a specific move order, but you don't 100% remember it because you don't fully understand what's going on, and so you mess up the move order, and all of a sudden you played a bad move. So over relying on our opening preparation is definitely a huge danger. And then, of course, yeah, when we're just studying endlessly and just analyzing super deep, then you get to the board and it's it feels like the first time you're seeing the position. And that's an experience we've probably all had, or lots of players had, where you've prepared an opening really deeply, then you show up to the board and it just feels like a completely unfamiliar position to you. So let's say maybe the biggest danger of opening preparation, honestly, guys, is just spending too much time working on the opening and neglecting the rest of your chess. And let me be very clear about that. I think it's really possible to just spend way too much time, and a lot of players do it. But ultimately, your chess results are going to be based on how well you play the game, right? It's you might know the opening a little bit better than your opponent. You might even get a good position. But if you're not able to play well and capitalize on your advantage, a lot of times good opening prep just ends in small space advantage, and then you have to play from there. If you're not able to play good chess, then of course the results won't come. So the first danger is just spending way too much time on the opening, as some players do. But there's also specific dangers when it comes to preparing the opening as well. And yeah, we'll get into some of those here. Okay, so a few of you recognize this position. This is from Kramnik-Leko in the World Championship match in 2004. And this was a very, very famous example of one of the issues with opening prep, which is when you rely too much on the engine. The engine, of course, doesn't know everything, right, guys? It's just giving you its opinion of the position, its evaluation. It doesn't always give you the best move, and if you rely on it too much, you might end up walking into a really dangerous position. So this is kind of what happened in this game between Kramnik and Leko. Actually, let me just take you guys back through it and kind of show you what happened. So this was a Marshall as Leko was playing at the time. And the story behind this game is this was, I think, Kramnik's third or fourth game with white in the match. I think this was game 8. And in the previous games, he had played the anti-Marshall, so he didn't allow black to get into the Marshall gambit and go for this sharp position. He played some other moves here like a3 and h3 and basically didn't really get anything. So he really wanted to go for a fight in this game, and they prepared this very, very rare and sharp line. So some of you guys are probably familiar with the Marshall. I don't know if any of you guys play this with either color, but these positions get pretty sharp. And yeah, they prepare this rare idea with rook e4 and queen to f1. And here black is given a choice. Either black can trade queens and go for this endgame, which, okay, black is still down a pawn, right? Not the easiest endgame for black to play, although black is supposed to be fine. Or black can play what Leko does in the game with queen to h5 and keep the queens on the board. So here Leko spent a ton of time. I believe he spent a full hour on this decision, trying to figure out what to do. And this is one of the advantages of being really well prepared in the opening. If you catch your opponent in some line that they're not really familiar with, then of course they have to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. Either they make a mistake right away and they fall into some kind of trap or bad position, or they're able to find some good moves, but then of course they have to burn a lot of time doing it, and maybe you still get into some kind of fighting position, but you have a big time advantage on the clock. So that's of course very useful. Okay, good question from the chat. Why do people still allow the Marshall? This game was from 2004, so it was a different time back then. Nowadays, I think, yeah, you do see a lot of players playing more like anti-Marshall systems because they don't want to get into this crazy, crazy mess. Because everyone saw what happened to Kramnik in this game, and they're wondering, wow, maybe we shouldn't play like this from White's point of view. So Leko spends a bunch of time. He keeps the queens on with queen h5, and the prep here for White continued for some time. Is the Marshall that bad for White? No, the Marshall is certainly playable for White. It's just a very, very sharp opening. And, you know, you're going into this position armed with computer preparation. If one thing goes wrong, or if you miss one idea, or if you forget one idea, or your opponent plays a new move that you haven't really considered, you know, all that engine analysis isn't really going to help you come up with the move over the board, right? You're still going to have to find that move yourself. So it might not be a very practical approach to go for these super, super sharp positions. So their prep here continues. F3, Leko goes knight f6, rook e1, rook e8, takes. Here Kramnik goes a4. And after some thought, again, Leko plays queen to g6. And at this point, this is move 21, Leko is down to like under 20 minutes to make like 19 more moves, yeah, to get to the time control. Kramnik is way ahead. He's only spent like 20 minutes in the whole game. Leko's down under 20 minutes. So Kramnik's like over an hour ahead on the clock. And after this move, queen g6, okay, black is threatening now bishop to d3 and fighting for counterplay. Black is down a pawn, but has very active pieces. And this is kind of black's idea here with bishop d3 and rook to e2. But the prep here continues. A takes b5. And Leko goes bishop d3. Kramnik goes queen f2 pretty quickly. Black goes rook to e2. And now Kramnik plays the prepared idea of his team. Queen takes e2, sacrificing the queen, and b takes a6. And so this was their idea. They sacked the queen. White now has a rook for the queen, but of course really, really strong a-pawn that's just running and trying to promote. And I think they were mainly expecting this move, bishop takes a6, where after rook takes a6, they evaluated this position as being better for White. At least the engine at the time evaluated it as being good for white. And yeah, okay, white has play against this pawn, and the rook is very active, easy target on f7. And so yeah, at the time, the engines were saying that white is having a big advantage. But as Brian is saying in the chat, computer bad in 2004. Yeah, back then the engines weren't all that strong, and they just didn't run the position long enough. According to what was written about the game, they ran this position for about 15 or 30 seconds, and they needed to run it for a good 90 seconds to 2 minutes to actually figure out that black is winning in this position if black finds the right move here. And okay, that was back in 2004. We can say, yeah, the engines were much weaker back then, but players are still making these kinds of mistakes all the time. I would say the majority of us, when we're analyzing with a computer, we're probably letting it run for 5 seconds, looking at the evaluation, and then moving on. Okay, I know a lot of you guys probably have seen this game before, so who remembers the key move here for black? That Leko found, by the way, without any assistance from the engine, that he found because he's just an incredibly strong player, and he realized that he needs to play dynamically. Yeah, queen d3, exactly. So okay, again, at the time, the engines were saying white is winning in this position, even though it's very, very sharp. And at the board, once they got here, Kramnik now realized, as he was calculating, that he is in big trouble, because if white plays a7 here, how does black actually continue? Queen e3 check. White goes king to g2, and now, yeah, bishop takes f3 check, knight takes f3, queen e2 check, king to g1. And this is the key move that, I think this is the move that the engines just kind of miss from afar, at least back then, because I remember analyzing this one because I was very curious. And yeah, back then the engines were saying like white is winning, white is winning. Then you get to this moment and the engine spots knight to g4, and all of a sudden white is getting mated. Yeah, exactly, because now there's no defense. Queen f2 check, queen takes f3, and then mate. Well, immediate threat is yeah, exactly, check, take the knight, or check, queen f1, knight f2, also mating. And yeah, white can promote with check. That's a lot of material, but after king g7, there's no defense. White can only prolong until they get mated. So sitting there at the board, Kramnik figures this all out after queen d3, realizes he's losing. He tries king f2, and then the attack is still, anyway, too strong. Takes, knight e4 check, and yeah, white was just getting mated. So now the interesting thing is that actually Kramnik took on a lot of risk in this position, because back then the players understood the engine doesn't always get things right, and so this is one danger. When you just over rely on the engine, sometimes it's just going to get things completely wrong in a really, really sharp position, and you have to be careful. Now back then what top players would do is they wouldn't just blindly trust their engine analysis and just play it super fast. They would kind of double check it at the board. They would sit there and analyze, and if it didn't make sense to their own eyes and understanding, then they just wouldn't go for the line. They'd be like, oh, this is too complicated, and they would do something else. But because of the match situation and Leko was already way low on time, Kramnik decides to take a risk here. He blindly trusts his preparation without double checking it, because for sure he would have figured out the problem if he did. And then, okay, we saw kind of disastrous result, like losing huge game with white. Now he's behind in the World Championship match and has to come back. Okay, so that's one big danger right there. Sometimes the engine simply gets things wrong, and if you play a move that you yourself don't fully understand or fully believe in, that might end up in a big disaster at the board. Now let me show you guys a couple other examples of how opening prep can sometimes go wrong. Bring another game here. Oh, question, what happens after queen f2, rook e2, and then b takes. So yeah, this was also possible. I think the idea here was takes, and queen h6. Black has this move, and again, black's attack is just very, very strong. Like king g1, for example, and then g4, and this all opens up. Or if knight f1, maybe just taking, and queen takes h2, followed by this one. Looks super dangerous. Yeah, let's say a7 takes, white promotes, king g7. Bishop e3. Oh yeah, actually it's still still pretty complicated, right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, let's check this one. Let's see if we have anything else. Knight f1. Queen h3. That might be possible. Yeah, bishop g5. And now maybe taking on f1, yeah? Looks really scary. Yeah, rook takes f1. Let's say takes this. It's true. We have bishop b8. No, I mean a really sharp position. I don't know it exactly, but yeah, black has a lot of counterplay here. So white is just not in time in all these lines. Yeah. Okay, so I'll show you guys another example. This one comes from my games, and this is something that a lot of players do when they first kind of start preparing openings, and so I'll just share this story with you guys so that you don't fall into the same trap that I did. So I was preparing a game. I was playing white against FIDE master Eugene United. Plays a lot of open tournaments. Some of you guys might have played him as well. And of course, Eugene is a big King's Indian player. So I'm a d4 player, and I'm expecting to face the King's Indian. Exactly, yeah. So I remember preparing, and this was one of my first times preparing for an opponent, so I looked up his games, and I remember seeing a game where he lost very quickly in the bayonet attack, which I think maybe I'd played once or twice up to that point. I'm not really sure. But I saw he lost this game where he played knight e8, and his opponent played kind of rare move queen b3. Main line is, I believe, to play for knight d2, c5, knight c4. Kind of a little bit more aggressive, but queen b3 is kind of a rare approach. But white totally crushed that game. That game continued f5, c5, black played h6, white played a4, black played king h8, knight d2. So both sides are getting their play going. Black is now coming towards white on the king side, and white is just throwing everything on the queen side. Knight b5, rook to g8, bishop b2, bishop f8, rook c1, g5, and now white broke through with knight takes c7 and was totally crushing. Queen takes c7, c takes d6, opening up this one, and also targeting e5. So now after queen takes, knight c4, this was just totally devastating, and white went on to win pretty convincingly. So I remember seeing this game, and I was like, great, looks good. I just want to do exactly that. And so I decided to just play the exact same system. So, showed up to the board. We had like King's Indian, and I played b4 here. Black played knight e8, and I played queen to b3. Okay, so let me ask you guys, what's the issue with this approach? Why is it maybe not a great idea to just try to directly copy what your opponent has already faced in previous games? why might not be such a great strategy? Yeah, of course, it's like if they lost this game, right, where they get crushed out of the opening, they're probably going to analyze the game and learn from it, right? So if anything, they're going to be better prepared in this opening next time. Not everyone. Some players, they lose a game and then they get really upset by it and they don't want to analyze it, and so then they end up losing like in a similar way again because they didn't really learn from it. That happens too. Don't do that, guys. Try to learn from your losses. But many players, especially like tournament players, are going to be analyzing their games quite a bit. And yeah, especially if they get crushed, then they're definitely going to check that one and learn for the future. So it's a little bit naive to think that your opponent is not just going to improve on their past games. Now, one thing you can try to do is you can try to target the games where your opponent won. Right? A lot of times if a player wins a game, especially if they win easily, they might not check it as carefully if they made any mistakes, especially if they played kind of a sketchy opening, but then they ended up winning the game. They might not want to change it or even think they need to change it for next time. And then maybe that's worth targeting if you think that's not such a great line that they're playing. But anyway, this is kind of the exact opposite. And predictably, my opponent improved on his previous game. Here, okay, a4 and knight d2 is played by white. I started with knight d2. Now f4 is played, a4, g5, and compared to the last game, here black doesn't really waste time with moves like king h8, rook to g8, just immediately gets the pawns moving on the king side, which is a much better approach, as now black's king side attack is a lot faster. Black just doesn't need to spend all these moves on king h8 and so on. And yeah, predictably, I just got absolutely wrecked in this game. I played all the same moves that white played earlier, like knight to b5, and then black played g4. And okay, here I realized, hold on, it's just like a different position. If I just keep playing all the same moves, I'm just going to get checkmated with some f3 soon, or knight g6, f3, and so on. So yeah, all of a sudden, I'm now in a position that I don't understand at all. And of course, I got mated in a couple of moves here. Although the engine doesn't even think my position is that bad. I checked this one recently, but of course, I walked into a position that's really, really difficult for white to play if you don't fully understand it, just blindly relying on this one game that I saw. And of course, I was terribly punished for this one. So I think I played g3 here because I was really worried and trying to slow down black's attack. But yeah, I eventually just end up getting absolutely killed with h4, rook h7, and yeah, I just get mated. So that's maybe another danger of opening prep, is just kind of playing into the same position and not really expecting your opponent to improve on their past play. Big no-no. You should always assume that your opponents are going to know what games of theirs are in the database and are definitely going to analyze them and be better prepared in the future. And so it brings me back to my main point, guys. The main thing that determines your success in chess is going to be how well you play, right? How well you play out of the opening and in the middle game and so on. Opening prep can give you a little bit of a boost, but of course it's never going to replace being a good chess player and really understanding your middle games and what you're doing. Okay, let's move on. I want to show you guys another example here. This one is pretty cool, and once again, kind of a similar story here, but let me load this one in. So this is a game played, I think, in a team tournament a couple years ago between two pretty strong players around 2350, 2400, and this game was a French. And I'll just take you guys to the critical moment. So they play this kind of main line. I don't know who plays this in the class, if you guys play this from either color, but it might be kind of an interesting game for you to pay attention to. So bishop e3, bishop e7, queen d2, black castles. And here white goes d takes c5, knight takes c5, castles. Oh yeah, quite a few of you guys play it. Cool. A6. H4. I think there are options for both sides in this position, but this is one of the sharper ways for white to play this position. B5. And now I'm pretty sure the main move here is bishop to d3, as far as I remember. But in this game, white goes bishop takes c5 first, and then bishop to d3. And this was kind of a rare idea. Now, I'm not sure how deeply white prepared this one. It's really not clear to me. But after b4, which is played by black, white sacks on h7. Bishop takes h7. And this is a very strong piece sacrifice. The engine shows it immediately. So it's possible that this whole idea was prepared from white's point of view. Because there was actually a previous game here where in this position black played knight to b4. And in the previous game, white sacked on h7 and had a winning attack. Takes, knight g5, queen e2 is played here. Now the idea is if g6, then white is playing f5 and just has a really, really strong attack. f6 was played in that game, and white won very convincingly. King b1, bishop takes f4, knight e4, and very strong move using the pin, bringing the knight to d6 to cover the escape square, and then just setting up this mate on the h-file. So there was a previous game like this. This first game was back in 2016. This game that we're looking at here was played in 2018. So again, I'm not sure if white had this whole thing prepared, but it's reasonable to believe that they might have. So black goes b4, white sacks on h7. And it's also possible, as it often happens when you're preparing an opening, that the engine says, like, okay, if they play b4, bishop takes h7 is something like plus 2.5, plus 3. And a lot of players, they don't really look at it deeper. They're just like, okay, the sack is winning, I'll figure it out over the board. And that maybe that's something that happened here as well, because the engine does show this idea in a lot of lines. So here's what happens. White takes, king takes, knight g5 check, king g8. Now white goes queen to d3, threatening mate, g6, and h5. So white has already sacrificed one piece, now is offering up a second piece. But the idea is, of course, to take on g6 and open up black's king and deliver mate. So black plays, I think, the best try. Knight takes e5. Now if fe, then queen takes g5 check. So what should white play here? What do you guys think? Okay, actually I'm going to close chat for this part while you guys are thinking about the position. Yeah, and here we're going to get into a scenario where sometimes happens. You know that the engine thinks you're winning, right? So you might have, analyzed a similar continuation, or you might have seen this exact position in your analysis, and you might see that the engine is giving you +3. But over the board, you still have to find the moves, right, and win the game. So just knowing +3 is not necessarily enough to winning the game. Okay, so queen h3, a lot of you guys said, very good. That's the best move, because now white is starting to take and give mate on the h-file. Black played king g7. Okay, now, I'm still telling you guys, the engine still loves white's position, but how to continue? We know it's +3, maybe +3.5, or even +4, as the engine keeps thinking, eval keeps going up. But how to continue from here? Yeah, now Austin is saying, kind of simplifies things because now it feels like a puzzle, so it makes it a little easier. Yeah, that's true. But my point here is going to be, even knowing the engine eval, sometimes it's very, very hard to find the right move. And so even if you know your position is winning, you might still end up in huge trouble in the game. Okay, knight e4, very strong move, very nice. So immediately this move would not be obvious to lots of players, and a lot of players might play something else and just already end up down a piece and lost. This is a nice move. It defends the knight on g5 and threatens to take on e5. Because if white were to, let's say, take here, for example, immediately, then what is black doing here? What's the problem with this one? Yeah, rook h8 is quite annoying, and white isn't getting the attack. like rook h8. We can try knight h7. And now what should black play here? What do you guys think? Yeah, knight takes g6. And white has a check. But no real follow-up here. The rook on h8 is defended. Okay, knight f6, queen takes f6. And yeah, basically white has no threat, so black is fine. Now, so knight e4, very important move, threatening to take here. If black moves the knight away, then hg becomes a much stronger threat. Black played bishop e7. Now reinforcing the attack. So once again, if white takes on e5, then bishop takes g5 check, and black is absolutely fine. Okay, what to do here? How should white proceed? And again, you know the position is still supposed to be +4, but how to actually get it? That's the problem. Like, even knowing that you have like a huge eval here, it's supposed to be a winning position. It might only be winning because of one very concrete line that is, you know, it takes an engine to find, right? It's very, very difficult for humans. So a lot of times, even if you get a good position, you get your prep in or you get some kind of nice trap in, you still end up in a position that you yourself have to figure out, and that might be pretty tricky. Okay, some guesses here for hg, rook h8, queen h7 check. That's a good try. This feels very engine-like. But let's see, takes, rook takes. Yeah, let's say king g8. I think the idea was to go rook dh1. There was also king takes g6. We can definitely consider that as well. Yeah. But let's just say this one, it looked like knight takes g6 should be okay for black. Also, you guys are saying bishop f6. Let's see. Yeah, doesn't seem like white is winning here either. Bishop f6 is sus. Yeah, I kind of like knight takes g6, just taking this one and covering h8. And if there's no mate, okay, then white is just down a queen. So this is not working. Any other ideas for this position? And honestly, I'm not even looking for you guys to necessarily solve this one because I think it's pretty tough, but rather just to demonstrate, it's like even if you know you're totally winning, like the evaluation is +4, it's really hard to actually figure it out over the board. And your mind will play tricks on you. You're thinking like, oh, it should be +4, so it should be something sharp or should be something crazy, but then you have no idea what kind of moves to look at. And you might even be better off not even knowing the evaluation. Yeah, so lots of decent guesses. I don't think I've seen like 5 or 6 different moves, but not the right one yet. Which is totally fine, and that's what I was, because I remember I was following this game, I think it was live, and I was watching on Chess24, where it has like the engine running, and I remember seeing it and I was thinking like, I don't think white's gonna find this move. It just looks kind of random. Okay, Roger guessed it. Very nice. Queen g3. I think this was our 7th or 8th guess. So this move wins. This move wins for white because you're defending the knight. It is actually kind of logical, and you're, again, creating this threat. We're not walking into the pin with queen to h4, so that's why queen g3 is kind of better. And so if this knight moves, then all these ideas with hg become a lot stronger. And we saw in a lot of these lines white was getting hit with rook h8 tempo, so queen g3 kind of avoids that. So the move kind of makes sense once you see it, but over the board, I think most players are not playing queen g3 in this position. And that's not what happened. In the game, white played hg. Black played rook h8, knight h7. We got this line actually. Knight takes g6. And black was already winning. If check, king g8. White just has no threats in this position, and black is up a piece, and yeah, everything's falling apart for white. So unfortunate, because it's like white had really good prep, finds this like super nice piece sack out of the opening, but then you have to play like an engine to follow it up. So it's like very, very tough. Sometimes you walk into a position that's just difficult to play. And the way around this is to always like just keep in mind that chess is a difficult game, right? So you have to not just trust what the computer thinks, but always take ownership of your moves. Say like, okay, you want to play the sack, so you want to really carefully analyze it and make sure that you understand exactly what the ideas are. Yeah, white ended up losing this game. Yeah. After takes, knight g3. Bishop h4 was played. Knight h5 check, king takes h7, and white resigned because now it's two pieces and no way to win the material back or get any chances. But again, this kind of thing happens quite frequently. I'll show you guys another example from my own games. I think I'm a good lecturer for this topic because I have a lot of experience in opening prep gone wrong. So this is another example. This is a game I played back in 2016. And I remember preparing this line quite a bit. I'd been playing it quite frequently. Eventually, I kind of stopped because I felt like every game I would out-prepare my opponents, and then every game I would end up in trouble. So eventually I realized like maybe these positions aren't exactly suiting my style. So I prepared this one. My opponent was a 2400 rated player, I think international master. And he goes for this Grunfeld line. And one of the ideas behind this one is that against the Grunfeld, the point is to play a quick e4, and there's no knight on c3 for black to trade. So white gets to keep more pieces on the board. And these positions are generally pretty sharp because white is playing for like queen d2, castles, and almost like a Yugoslav English attack type of play. So I'll show you guys what I prepped here. We went for this line, and this was very fashionable at the time. Here, black is just getting all the pieces out and putting pressure on d4. Knight b5, queen d7, king b1, rook d8. I played d5 here. Black plays a6. This was all, again, the hottest cutting-edge theory. Knight c3, queen e8, pinning the d-pawn. White goes queen c1, unpinning. Knight a5 was played. And here I played bishop f4. And at the time, the main moves in this position were to go h4 and bishop h6, I think was maybe the main move, or maybe h4. The idea behind bishop f4 was just to attack this pawn. And it's actually kind of awkward for black to defend it. So the main idea was that if they go like rook d7, which is kind of the most straightforward way of defending the pawn, well, now white goes bishop h6, and now it's just a much better version because this rook on d7 is completely in the way of black's pieces. And I think there's actually, there was like a Nakamura versus So game here where white had a big advantage. So I remember preparing this one. I felt very clever. And at this point, my opponent started spending a lot of time. And eventually, he just plays the move knight c4. So he just sacks the pawn. And I remember I checked this one with the engine very, very briefly, and the engine just says, okay, bishop takes c7, black goes like rook d7 or something, and then you bring the bishop back, and white is better. Like 0.6, 0.7, something like that. And that was basically all I knew. So I took the pawn, just following my prep, rook to d7, and then I played bishop f4, and now black goes e6. Okay, so this is the moment. We'll pause here. I'll ask you guys to try to consider how white should continue. And a very interesting situation. We've grabbed the pawn. We know we're supposed to be better here. Again, the engine says plus 0.6, plus 0.7. So we know we should have some way of having a clear advantage here. Maybe two ways, we're not really sure. But how to do it? Because the position is really, really quite sharp. And I remember during the game, I started thinking here, and I spent a lot of time because I realized, like, okay, I'm up a pawn. It's supposed to be a good position. What exactly should I do here? Because my king is on b1. We've castled on opposite sides of the board. And of course, in positions with opposite sides castling, the initiative is very important. And here it just looks like, if I didn't know the computer eval, I would think white is in huge trouble. This bishop on g7 is an absolute monster. Knight on c4, of course, very nicely coordinated. And black has just played e6, trying to open things up even further. And yeah, if we take on e6, then minimum black has like rook takes d1, bishop takes e6, second rook comes in to c8, and it just feels like white's position is about to collapse. We're just like way behind in development. Okay, so any ideas here? Okay, got one suggestion for bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, and d6. And also a suggestion for knight e2 takes and knight d4. Just hoping hoping to plug the diagonal. Though that doesn't really seem like a position where white is necessarily fighting for the advantage, right? Doesn't really feel like one at first glance. But let's take a look at this one. Let's say takes d6. So yeah, a couple different ways black could play. So yeah, e5 was mentioned. I would also think maybe b5 is another way to play the position, just playing for b4 and trying to get to the b2 pawn, or just bringing the rook to c8. But yeah, both look quite dangerous. I would think black is better after e5. And yeah, and then b5 might be a chance to play for even more. Austin saying b5 not a big deal. Let's just take a quick look. All right, b5. Let's say knight e2, b4, knight a4. And maybe black has to play something like e5 here. Because knight b6 is annoying. That's true. Yeah, maybe we played b4 a little bit too early. Maybe bishop b7 first. And then I just want to put the rook on c8 and then play b4. I'm not sure how white is continuing here. Yeah, I don't really believe it, to be honest. Knight a4 if I just go rook c8 anyway. Yeah, I think it's very tough for black or for white here. But okay, that's kind of the point. It's a really tough position. You guys are not the ones that got into this mess. I am. It's my fault that we're here. But that's kind of the point here. It's like, even though the engine is saying that it's supposed to be good for white, we can see from practical point of view, it's just like really hard for white to find moves here. There were a couple other suggestions. Let's see. Yeah, so knight e2 takes and knight d4. Yeah, also looks really risky. Maybe d takes e4 here. Yeah. And everything is kind of opening up. White's knight is hanging. Yeah, so yeah, I think this isn't quite working either. Although this was the move I played in the game, knight ge2. Though after e takes d5, I just recaptured. And this was a pretty bad choice, all things considered. Let's flip the board, actually. Let me ask you guys now how should black continue from here? Because black is, of course, playing for the initiative. Definitely lots of ideas here. Lots of good moves here for black. Like at this point, actually, black's position I think is just very, very comfortable. So it's not like black has only one way to get a decent game here. So any like normal move like rook d8, rook e7, like getting out of the way of the bishop makes a lot of sense. But there's also some more forcing ideas that black should definitely consider here. Yeah. Now knight takes b2. I remember during the game, I was not actually. I wasn't too afraid of this one because after takes, knight a4 takes, at least white is getting 3 pieces for the queen. I don't know what the computer evaluation is, but it's probably not great for white. But at least I was thinking this isn't the easiest position for black to handle. And if the 3 pieces can actually coordinate and white can get the pieces out, then yeah, maybe one day white can be better. Although it just feels very, very messy. So I wasn't too afraid of that one. But yeah, it turns out black can just take on d5 here. Rook takes d5. Knight takes d5 is also good, but this one I think is just the simplest. Because, okay, we're opening up the bishop to come to f5 with tempo, and if white goes knight takes d5, this is what I did in the game, bishop f5 check, king a1. I think black can take on b2 with the bishop, but it takes with the knight. I think this is even stronger. And now white is just busted. it's just dead lost. If takes, king takes, queen comes in. I think queen b5 looks pretty good. And yeah, white is just losing too much material here. And yeah, that's it. It's just totally game over. Bishop h6, I tried bishop h8 and it just resigned in a couple moves. Knight c3, knight takes d1, this is hanging, and then yeah, rook c8 is coming, and yeah, it was just pretty hopeless. Like white is up a piece in this position, but the rook on h1, bishop on f1, these pieces are all gone. Queen takes e2 here, maybe. That's definitely it doesn't look not winning. I'll say that. I think my opponent is just trying to keep it simple. Oh, here. Queen takes e2, yeah? Then at least there's takes, queen b2. I think it's not as much as, yeah, not as much as black wants. So yeah, just keeps it simple. Yeah, all good, all good. Queen e2, queen e2. Maybe. I mean, it's a funny way to try to win the game. I think it's not super necessary because black is just totally winning. You don't need these kinds of like shenanigans, but might be winning. I think, I don't know, I would probably just go for the safer, like, no thinking rook c8, knight a4. But teach their own. So, let's go back. What should have white done? Well, instead of knight ge2, which neglects development, bishop takes c4 was the only move here. And I guess, again, there is a logic to it because white is behind the development, so we're just trying to trade and get all the pieces out. But at the same time, it's also not a logical move because it's allowing black to develop and get rid of like the superfluous knights on b6 and c4. And then back then, the engine gave this as the only move for white to try to get an advantage. And I think nowadays, today's engines would not love this position from white's point of view. But back then, this is what the engine was claiming is like 0.6 or 0.7 better for white. So yeah, show of hands, like who would want to play b3 in such a position with the bishop on G7. I can tell you guys I considered this move for not much. I don't think I even saw it as like a legal move in this position to play B3 against his bishop on G7. But the engine has its concrete reasoning, and thinks black has nothing better than knight to E5, knight E2, and yeah, likes white in this position. I don't know. I think from a practical point of view, very, very scary. It's not like our bishop is on, like you guys are saying that we have the dark square bishop, but it's not like our bishop is on B2, defending the diagonal. It's on F4, and so it just looks incredibly scary. Now, maybe some players would find this continuation. It was not on my radar at all. But the bigger point here is that, a lot of times you might be preparing an opening, walking into a position maybe doesn't suit your style. Right, so not everyone, myself included here, is going to feel comfortable in this kind of position. Extra pawn, but our king is in huge danger. I'd rather probably be down a pawn, but be the one with the initiative. It's just kind of the positions I feel like I enjoy a little bit more. So you want to be very, very thoughtful about the openings that you're choosing, also in terms of your style and the positions that you like to play. Lots and lots of cases where someone maybe sacrifices a pawn out of the opening, but they don't really want to be playing a pawn down. They're not that type of player where they can sacrifice and then just play for the long-term initiative. They'd rather play it safe and solid, and so it might not be the best option for them. And then we have these kinds of cases where you have to go pawn grabbing, you have to take a pawn in order to try to prove the advantage, but then you walking into a really, really sharp position that is, going to be very difficult to handle. Okay, question. Do I think 2,000 to 2,200 players are good enough to have a style? I don't know. I mean, it's a fair question. I think most players do have an idea of what they feel more comfortable with, whether it's like more open positions or more closed positions. And I mean, easy test is like if you play E4 or D4, that probably provides a little bit of insight into the kinds of positions you feel more comfortable in. And yeah, actually, if there are any other questions, guys, we can hang out for a few minutes if you have any specific questions on opening prep. I'd be happy to answer them. What was my most embarrassing loss? Oh, embarrassing. It was the one I showed earlier when I prepared that King's Indian and lost out of the opening super, super fast. That was my most embarrassing game. At what level should one heavily prepare? My feeling for you guys, you really don't have to be spending a lot of time on the opening. It is helpful and it is important to kind of know your openings, but I would say it's only if you're like getting in trouble in the opening. So if you play a tournament and you feel like every single game or most games it's like you're not getting out of the opening alive, especially like with black, your opponents are just crushing you, that's a sign like, okay, you have to work on your openings. You have to make sure that you're getting playable positions. But if for the most part you're getting very playable and normal positions out of the opening, and then you're making mistakes later on, then I don't think you really have to spend a lot of time on the opening. Let's say up to 22, 2300 or so. But that might be the level where you start to maybe take it a little bit more seriously. Oh, in terms of preparing game by game, honestly, that's up to you. I mean, if you have like overnight, for example, and your opponent, your opponent for the next morning, or if you have like a couple hours to prepare for the game, I think it can be helpful to look up your opponent and try to see what opening they play, and then maybe just review either some of your recent games in that opening or some of your opening analysis if you've done any. I think they can be helpful a little bit, but I would suggest not to go overboard, right? Where you're like spending hours and hours. If you have a choice between like resting for 20 minutes or trying to like prepare some opening, I would probably advise you to just rest and try to show up fresh and ready to play. Yeah. So long story short, to sum up our lesson for today, be careful with doing opening preparation. Number one, spending too much time on it and neglecting the rest of your chess is probably not going to be great. I would mainly be advising you guys to work on tactics and middle games, especially like understanding your middle games and analyzing games, trying to figure out why top players make certain moves and make the decisions that they do. I think that ultimately is going to be the most helpful thing to getting you guys to become really strong chess players. But beyond that, when you do start doing some opening preparation, you want to be really careful about not just walking into a position that you yourself don't completely understand. Sometimes we prepare an opening that the engine itself doesn't understand, and we just get a bad position. Other times, maybe it is a good position, but you yourself don't quite feel the position, and so you get this position on the board that you then don't like. And of course, that's what causes people to play badly, make bad moves, and lose quickly. And I've had this experience many times where maybe I out-prepare my higher rated opponent, IM or GM, but they just have a much better experience in that kind of position, and so they just immediately outplay me once the prep is over. And I've had that experience from the opposite side as well, where maybe my opponent out-prepares me in some King's Indian or something, but because I have a much better understanding of the opening and the types of positions, I'm then able to outplay them. And ultimately, the opening prep, it's not only that it's like not necessarily helpful for them, if anything, it's like helpful for me because it gets us into a position that maybe I feel a lot more comfortable in than they do. So be very thoughtful about the openings that you prepare, guys. Try to really think about what kinds of positions you want to play, and then really study those positions carefully. Study games and common things that might happen, as that's what's really going to prepare you for the actual battle. All right, let's see. Austin asks, I just got to NM. How long do you think it'll take me to get to FM? 2 years, tops. Why don't people play A4 and stuff in the common moves? What do you mean, A4 like on move 1? Or what are you saying? A4 on move 1, it doesn't fight for the center, so that's why we don't see it too often. Okay, guys, I think we'll finish up the class there.